So you've seen cyclone dust collectors for like 60 bucks. They're flimsy plastic. And essentially how they work is they have a inlet for the hose, and then they have an outlet for the shop vac, and it's, basically it gives you a bucket that all of the dust is going to be collected in, and it's collected in the bucket because what they say is cyclonic action. They get the dust spinning in a circle, and that carries inertia with it. So then when it hits the bucket, it happens to fall to the bottom, and there's suction to basically floating in the middle of the bucket. So that's kind of the way they work. They're flimsy, they're cheap, they're cheaply made, but they're like 70 bucks. And I figured, it's not that difficult of a concept. I wonder if you could just make some out of parts that you have laying around. I had some PVC laying around, had an idea, went to the hardware store to buy a couple parts, and then realized there's actually probably a slicker way to do that. So what we have here is 1.5 inch PVC with 3-inch PVC fittings. The outside diameter of your shop vac fittings is about 2 3/8. And the inside diameter of most of your fittings for your 2-inch PVC are actually 2 1/4. So it's about an 1/8 inch that you got to make up with some foam or some gasketing or material of some sort. So let's kind of show you what I'm come up with. We have 2 fittings here, 3-inch. They're threaded. I'll show you, basically what they look like and what they look like in the store with model numbers and whatnot. They're a couple bucks a piece. They thread together. So my thought is this is what will sandwich into the bucket lid. So this bridges the bucket lid. Just cut a small hole and tighten that down, and then that'll actually give it a nice, solid, secure connection. You don't have to use screws or fasteners. This is a special type of fitting. Essentially, it's a 3-inch elbow with a 2-inch inlet. And what that's going to do is it's going to sit vertically. This is going to be the inlet for the dusty air. So dusty air comes in, goes down, and then this pipe will go through it, comes up, and that's what you connect onto your shop vac. So let me show you how it puts together. I also picked pieces that fit together without any intermediate steps. So these two, those go together. This is an adapter to go from 3-inch to 2-inch. That goes together. This piece has to be routed out. This is basically going to sit in here, and this is going to pass all the way straight through. But I have to take the Dremel to sand that down. But you can imagine that passes through. Now this, of course, lives on the other side of the bucket, so that just simply gets screwed in there. And I thought, I could stop there. You can see, and that's kind of how they all look. This goes to the shop vac, and this is where the dust's supposed to come down. But I thought, why not add a little shield on it? I can gap it a little bit, and I might actually get some more separation of dust. To finish her off, we'll have this piece sitting right on top. And then that way both my inlets are on one side, or to balance the weight, I could actually have that sitting on the other side. So this is pretty much what we're left with. It's about 20 bucks for you to go to the store and buy all this stuff yourself. It's way more sturdy, but first thing we got to do, use a Dremel to sand that down, and then assemble and test. So for this step, we're going to take a Dremel that has a sanding wheel on it, and this is the lip that I need to sand down. So I'm basically just going to fire this up, run it around, and speed it up so you don't have to watch the whole thing. Next step, we need to mark a hole, and it's going to have to be bigger than the outside diameter of the thread. So essentially what we'll do is we'll come around, follow that with a permanent marker, and cut that out with either a hole saw or a jigsaw. Now we've got this piece sanded down. Now it slides all the way through, which is exactly what we wanted. So it's going to act as a collar to fit in here. So that'll stay right about there. And when it's all said and done, then obviously we can glue it. And then until I cut this, I want to just make sure, proof of concept, we'll set that on there, and we'll end up with something that almost looks kind of like a potato launcher, but it's going to actually be a cyclone vacuum. Next, let's get the jigsaw out and do some cutting. So what I ended up doing is these two fittings, these threaded fittings, they don't actually cinch all the way down. I didn't know that because I hadn't tried that before now. That's okay, there's two options there. I can cut the thread shorter, but in the interim, I just simply sandwiched the fittings together at that point. So holds a little bit better. This is going to go in the bucket, but not before we take our long tube and we at least run. We have to either put this in first, so that way, and I'm thinking we're probably going to want it somewhere around that kind of a gap. So remember, this is where the air comes back into the shop vac. This air is leaving because that's creating suction. There's actually, this is in a negative vacuum. You could say that this bucket is in a vacuum. So these pieces simply get re-sandwiched on. The other thing I could do is, to that lid, I could actually take a piece, like a piece of wood that's got a matching hole, and then I can cinch it down, which is what I might do. And there we go. Now we have our bucket. Take your shop vac. Now remember, the lower output is going to be what you actually use to suck any material up. So that's going to be this point here. And then this point up here goes back to your shop vac. Now, as I mentioned, there's about, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch total there. So there's a couple ways we can make that happen. I think the final option is going to be to actually insert a piece of 2-inch PVC and then sand it down on the inside to get it be thin-walled enough that this pressure fits. Again, you're trying to create a vacuum, you do need it to be pretty tight. So we'll try that, but in the interim, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gasket this real quick and then do a functional test. Okay, so what we've done is I cleaned out the shop vac. That's about as clean as that filter is going to be. I think a new one would be great for the test. So as I said, I gasketed this real quickly. I just basically took masking tape, put masking tape on it. So we have our contraption. As I mentioned, the input to the shop vac is the top. And this is what we're going to use to suck up all the material. Essentially what I have here on the ground is a giant pile of sawdust. It's actually what I dumped out of here. So we're going to see what it looks like when I run this and suck up all this wonderful stuff. All right, let us see how much made it in here. So what we have, we actually do have some dust in here. It's not perfectly clean. This is apparently not a perfect system. However, given how little was in here, that gives us a pretty good sign of what's in there. How about that, huh? So this funny little cheap system actually worked. Now that's about the amount of gap that I had on it. I imagine a smaller gap might be slightly better. And obviously as this fills up, we're just gonna start sucking in some of the dust. But I would say we got a pretty decent functioning system. So where we last left off, I had a very long tube. Now I have a shorter tube. I did cut that off. If you remember, I couldn't get these threads to combine together and seat all the way down based on how thin the cover was. So the solution there was to take a circular piece of wood that I happen to already have because I make a lot of speaker boxes. So I always have round wood around. Found one that kind of fits the lid. Cut a hole in the center of it, basically same as the lid. Then this will actually allow me to cinch it down. So I want the system to be removable. I want to make sure that I can take it apart, clean it, service it whenever necessary. This portion here, of course, just sits down in here. So now we have our lid. This piece, as mentioned, this has already been sanded down. If we offset them by 90 degrees, then it self-balances with the hoses. And this I will never glue because I always want to be able to disassemble it. Now I did find that when I had it up a little bit higher and that gap was smaller, I was trapping some debris like some wrappers and stuff like that. So I'll actually try it a little bit lower, a little bit further away. But the thing to be cognizant of is the depth of your bucket is going to determine how much stuff you collect, and you can start bringing some of the lighter dust back up in. So that's this. I still have my bucket of stuff, but we'll empty that out. And there we go. There's the completed version. Of the homemade DIY $20, you can call it a Dust Deputy, but we'll come up with a little bit better name. But it's fairly sturdy. It doesn't wobble. I mean, I can wobble it on the base, screw this base down. I mean, this is Schedule 40 PVC, so it's not as flimsy. It's not going to twist and torque, especially with the nice heavier base there. So there we go. I think what probably makes sense to do next is play around with it, work with it for a while, but we probably want to know, how can we streamline this? How can we make this whole concept a little bit better? Can we do anything around this ridge? Is there a different flared opening? Would increasing the flare maybe go from a 1.5 to a 4? That would, of course, slow the velocity of air in. I mean, part of what you're trying to do here is, you have the same amount of cubic feet per minute. The CFM is the volume of air that the vacuum is trying to bring in. Now, that's going to be constant. What we change when we change diameters, we change velocity, because everything has a cross-sectional area. So if you have volume and you divide volume by cross-sectional area, you're left with one more dimension. So CFM divided by area is speed, so it'd be feet per minute. So the slower air is coming into here, the less likely it's going to be to try and grab any of that lighter stuff up. Inevitably, some of the super light dust is probably going to make it by, but we know, all of this was collected in the bucket in the first test. So, but when I take a look at depth, there's only that much depth. A deeper bucket would actually be better. Because if you have a deeper bucket, then you can hold more material before it starts building up to the point where you're inevitably going to start sucking back in here. So maybe there's a ratio of which one works the best. If it's too tight, then obviously it's not going to work at all. And in this system, I can vary that. I can vary it up and I can vary it down. So it gives me a little bit of play there. I'm probably going to be catching on stuff just because this isn't a smooth transition. So maybe a real nice piece of tape around there to kind of give it a smooth transition might help. There's a few edges here and there inside. You could do this with 4-inch PVC also. I can show you my original design. The original idea, anyway. The original idea was to bolt this to a plate, have a hole cut here for a tube to pass through, and then have an adapter here that actually takes another 1.5 inches with an elbow to try and force it. Now this is 4-inch, so you're dealing with a larger overall inside volume, which may or may not be useful. It's hard to say. This version could be made with larger fittings, larger PVC, if you felt like you were too constricted on volume. So when you look down inside, you can see the other tube pass through, right? So you can see that I do have debris that has to get around this inner tube, but that's the same as the other commercially available version. So there you go. So the last piece of the puzzle is we need to create a gasket. We need to create a seal that we can get the fittings to go in. So this is the top part. And this is the, you could say it's the output to the vacuum itself, right? This is on the top of the dust collector. So this one's going to plug in there. And you can see it's a nice tight gasketed seal. It's more sealed than I think the fitting is here. And all I did was I used weather stripping foam, and I used some 3M 471 tape. I chose this because I had it laying around and it's got a nice silky smooth surface. Foam weather stripping tape you can buy in all kinds of sizes. If you want something fairly small here, I would say this is about an 1/8 inch closed cell. So this is going to be the connection that happens at the very top. This is what goes back to the vacuum. Now I need to work on the connection that goes to the smaller hose, which is what I actually suck stuff up with. I mean, you can interchange them as needed, but so this is loose, right? We knew that this was going to be loose. So what our plan is I want to decrease the diameter of this. So I'm going to do that by laying some weather stripping foam in here, and I kind of give myself a rough measure, and I'm going to trim it at the end to exactly fit. And what you want to do when you're working this foam in is you push it into place. You don't actually pull it. So I'm actually feeding it in. And I want a nice continuous layer. Now I could do 1 layer, I could do 2, meaning in depth, not in thickness. Get it trimmed, get it seated back in on itself, and you're left with a somewhat tidy foam ring. Now if you just did this and you push that fitting in, all you're going to do is deform the foam. So what we're going to want is there's this piece, the way that I built this, like this one was easy. I just wrapped tape around the outside, folded it in, done. This one has an outer shape because this is one of the hubs. So what I think we're going to do here is we don't want the tape to pull away. If I tried earlier just laying it in and then folding it over, that didn't seem to work. So I want, the tape's going to see a lot of force on it when you're pushing it in and pulling it out, right? So I think what we're going to want to do is cut strips and simply lay them in, attach them to the outside. And it doesn't have to be super tidy. And because this actually fits inside a pipe, I'm thinking I'll probably have to trim this back. I don't think I'm going to be able to leave these yellow pieces of tape there. But we shall see. And it looks like I only really need to do 4 of the sides to overlap completely. So the question is, if I push this in, how does it feel? A, does it go in? And it's tight. Tight is good because we want it to be airtight. It's almost too tight because I think getting this in and out is going to be a little more difficult, but it certainly is a better seal than what's on the actual unit. So that's pretty good, man. That's really in there. The question is as I use this over and over again and leave it in there, it's probably going to stretch out. It'll become looser over time, which is fine because right now it's pretty tight. Now we are somewhat concerned about having a lot of loose sticky tape on the inside here because this is sucking up dirt and debris, and if I have a lot of loose sticky tape, it's probably going to be problematic. But overall, I'm going to give this a try. We'll kind of see from a longevity standpoint if it lasts long enough to be useful. I'm also curious about how this tape behaves once it's inserted into the nozzle. So let's take a look at that. So I've got my bucket, I've got my piece. Remember, this comes into here. We can just give her a smack. Sorry if it was loud. Sorry it was loud. I'll separate that video. Because I've added this tape, I've actually created more friction here. But I also don't want the tape to roll off. If I stopped it short, every time I plugged it in, I'd probably bust that tape loose. So what I think I'll do is I'll just grab my trusty rubber mallet, tap it in place, and then this becomes a pretty difficult piece to disassemble. So, again, color doesn't really matter. This piece goes here. I haven't even glued it yet, but it does seem to still be fairly airtight. So now it's gasketed. Now I can make my connections. And the important part about this is that I haven't modified the original factory hoses. So the factory hoses have stayed the same. I can use this or not use this. If you just wrap stuff around and wrap tape around this, then it doesn't fit in your shop vac anymore. So there you go. Now it's tight. This does swivel. I still haven't made this airtight yet. I don't know if I will. I don't know if it needs to be, because again, the rest of the fittings really aren't airtight. But I can if I want to. I can certainly change the height of this. I can change the orientation based on what's convenient for me. But there you go. If you got any questions, let me know. Hopefully you found it somewhat useful. But again, make up your own stuff, have fun, experiment. It's all about learning the process.